Hello, everyone, and welcome to Better Together Sunday Show. I'm your host, Nick Allen. We are extremely excited to welcome Aimee Tooker of the West End of Montrose County here to describe to us some of the great work and just organizing she's been doing to get her community involved. First off, Aimee, welcome to Better Together.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick. I'm glad to be here. I was really excited to reach out and
For sure. Well, we're
be on.
excited to have you on. Aimee and I worked in just years past on some activities in the West End, and so I'm really just interested to hear. Some of our audience might know, and just those that are politically active and aware know there was a big discussion, let's say, debate even around a national monument on the Dolores River. And Aimee, if you could just walk us through your perspective, like when you first heard about this whole decision about a monument potentially coming, and then what was your initial reaction and steps you took after that?
Aha. Yeah. I found out through Weedsy and when I was president of the Economic Development Corporation here, that it was being talked about. And so that was towards the end of August of 2023. And so in September of 2023, we had set up a meeting with the proponents of this and got together with about 20 of our community leaders here and talked about it. And it wasn't something that was really that we thought was, worth getting upset about. We didn't, we just thought it was in draft process, and that was the
Mhm.
beginning of the conversation. And of course, October, as the winter wore on, we realized that, conversations were happening without us. And finally, in January of 2024, I was able to get a hold of the 11th draft of the National Monument Proposal Map
Mm.
and the support book. And so then we realized that it was a lot farther along than we had thought. And so really doing some research and consulting with, other groups around here trying to figure out, what the next step is. And then in the middle of February, I had gone to Gateway and had gone through there, and there's a whole big story on how that ended up. But Gateway had no idea about this monument proposal, and they are, in the epicenter. And so after that, it
Mm.
really ramped up the public outcry for it. And so we just all started writing letters to the editor, reaching out to our senators and to, our, local elected officials. And this one lady from Bayfield, she reached out to me and said, I read your letter in the fence post, and I know what you need. You need coordination. And then we'll get into
Mm.
the coordination after that, but I've been really digging into it since then and in between time of you know, delaying that process, delaying the national monument, stopping the national monument was the most important thing. And then we can really take time to figure out what our next steps are.
Right,
Um, but
right.
as you can see, the senators listen to us. I'll give
Mhm.
credit to, where credit is due, and that's to, Senator Hickenlooper and Senator Bennett. They could have easily walked that proposal down to Biden's desk and had him sign it, and they didn't. They heard the public outcry, and so I really think that they listened, and I really think that moving forward, we can really have some interesting conversations.
Right. And I'm really excited to dig into that collaboration and work that you're putting towards that to kind of better understand. Tell me a bit more about the West End. Like what's the population like? What's the industries going on right now? A little history there too for our audience.
Aha. So, historically, in the beginning, we were agriculture, and throughout the years, it went to mining,
Hmm.
vanadium, uranium, coal, and then maybe again back to uranium and vanadium. So we've had those boom and bust cycles. And that's where, the community's in this transition point. A lot of our major industries have shut down and we're just, trying to recover from that. And so
Hmm.
working with, local groups, the Office of Just Transition, it's really, moving the community forward with values and, what we value as a culture and what we value as a community and making sure that our voices are heard. So, we're surrounded by public lands.
Hmm.
We're super remote. This is a really supportive community of the mining industry. When it's done safely and by the rules and, environmentally, safe. We really value those regulations, and we think we can do it. So, we're just moving forward and making sure that our community is at the tables and figuring those things out.
Right, right. And that's probably the biggest thing that I noticed. And, we had our work together around just transition and kind of discussing that future. And I'm excited to get into it at the end of this conversation. But when you first heard about the national monument and, it's like, oh, this is part of the conversation. And then the next time you hear about it, it's really far down the road. Like, how did you get people to recognize that this matters to them locally? How did you get engage people? This Better Together is all about engaging people. So how did you go about that part?
I would say the thing for me was the process. Something was happening to this community that would completely alter our future, what we want, and it was happening without us.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was the process and our culture, our future, our economy would have morphed into something not by our own doing. And so that's where I really engaged in the coordination process and making sure that this community is at the table making decisions with the land management agencies beforehand, so we're not surprised. And same thing with the land management agencies, making sure that their policies are consistent with the local policies, which they have to do according to FLIPMA and the Forest Service Act. They really have to make sure those plans are consistent. And it's not a local obligation, that's a federal obligation. And so I just want to make sure that that comes to our community so that we're not ever blindsided and that we can really have meaningful input and create that relationship with our land management agencies that really all along FLIPMA says those things. It was never meant that the land management agencies were just gonna do what they want. So, and that's where the next few slides will come in. I'll
Hmm.
explain that process. But it was just mostly things were happening without us,
Right.
and I'm not okay with that. It was the process. I don't love the Antiquities Act
Mm,
presidential swiping of the pen process.
right.
We're going to do something, we're going to do it together, and we're going to be at the table. It's not
Hmm.
going to be top down, it's going to be bottom up.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah, the thing I try and tell people is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
I'd
So
say that all the time too.
so let's
Bill
go ahead
Weiser
and
said it
let's
this weekend too, and I was like, "Oh, you stole my line."
it's a classic. It's a classic and it's real. And so that's what it's
Yeah.
about of community coming together and making sure they're represented. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
I'll open up these slides here.
Okay.
Um, and just some you sent me to kind of explain just the program you're working on. So everybody should be able to see these. Amy, can you see them okay?
I can. I
All right.
can.
Let's just walk through this process and just direct me as you will.
Yeah, so the coordination process is just that, a government to government dialogue to reach consistency. And so in FLIPMA, it says coordination, and it has different definitions for coordination and cooperation, the cooperating agency status, and collaboration. So over the years, that collaboration process has kind of morphed into something that it wasn't supposed to be. The NGOs and the nonprofits, the conservation, environmental groups, the user groups, they're collaborating partners. They're not actual, government to government. The local governments, the municipalities, the tax districts, like the fire district, the towns, the counties, all have taxing authority. And the socioeconomic welfare of their community depends on those federal lands and how they're managed,
Hmm.
all around us. It affects us all, and it affects private property rights where it's mining, outfitting, things like that. So these are different processes, and I just want to make everybody aware of that distinction So yeah, collaboration has kind of gotten out of control with, lawsuits against the BLM and making the BLM submit to them,
Mm.
kind of thing. Instead of the coordination process, which is, it's an ongoing process. The point is consistent, meaningful meetings with the land management agencies. And this is something for the towns and municipalities to do. And so, cooperating agency is when the towns or tax districts or other user groups are able to submit data and information so that the land management agencies can work on their resource management plans, their SOPAs, travel management plans. And so during the cooperation process, that's for a specific NEPA project that the land management agencies are doing. Coordination is consistent, it's ongoing, it happens before, during, after the the cooperating agency process. So those three distinct actions need to be supported. Um, it was never meant that, the land management agencies were just going to do what they want and we were going to react to them later.
Hmm.
Years ago, we had the Forest Service. They came through and closed down a whole bunch of our favorite roads and trails. And, the community was upset and reacted, as they, we all did, we all reacted to it. And so this is more of a proactive approach, where we can sit at the table together and say, hey, we really want this trail to stay open for these reasons. We're not, this trail over here, we're not opposed to letting go. People don't use it. There's no, real value there. But just coming together and making those decisions, like I mean, the conflicts that would be avoided, really, because that's an issue for those people that live in rural communities surrounded by
Hmm.
public lands. Um, I'm concerned about a lot of our ranchers, and their allotments with the BLM and having those consistent meetings and saying, "Hey, ranchers, the BLM range management guy is going to be here at this meeting. Let's go talk to him and ask him questions." And that way, they're not getting told one thing, they're not getting told another thing, and it's all consistent dialogue, consistent meetings. And so that's what I'm pushing for.
Lovely. Yeah, I mean, it's a way, and I think you've mentioned this. This is part of the rules, and this is a set up system. And a
Yes.
government should want its local people with the most experience on the ground helping guide this work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, you're doing a great job of, and you're exactly right. People should also know what their government is doing to the lands around them. If it's public land, it's the people's lands. We should have more of a say and understanding, especially those closest to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to a Northwest County commissioner this weekend, and I was explaining to him about what I've learned so far with the coordination process. And I said, the Endangered Species Act, they are supposed to cooperate with the local municipalities about the water resources for those endangered species.
Mm.
And they are, clearly not doing that with wolf reintroduction. And he said, Aimee, it's for me, it was of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's where he was very passionate about that. And I thought about that on the way home, and I'm like, yeah, that is defining a system where the government was created by and acts for the citizens of the nation, not by an elite monarch. You know, the authority of the government ultimately comes from the citizens.
Hmm.
And so, this process with, introduction and, it wasn't for the people by the people. Um, and so, I really think that this coordination, cooperating, collaboration process will really support those efforts of making sure that the data, the water resources, the community, local strategies are inputted into the management of our lands. And so I
Yeah.
think that's super important.
Would you like to continue down here with some of the?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, so the BLM, this is 43 USC 1712 C9 in the FLIPMA, the Federal Lands Management and Policy Act. It is a federal obligation. The Secretary of Interior shall coordinate. It is not a local obligation to make sure, but the secretary is supposed to coordinate with the and make sure that the plans are consistent with their plans. And so that's where I think that the process, the meetings, the regular meetings with the BLM is so crucial. Is to create that meaningful relationship and for them to make sure that their plans are consistent with what the local strategies are. And it says it in FLIPMA, and I'm going to hold them to it. And same thing with the U.S. Forest Service Act and the Travel Management Act for the Forest Service. Coordination. It means they will make sure that their plans are consistent with ours.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's what I'm pushing for.
I love that. The only thing that I felt when I was reading through this, a little seemingly nice loophole that some could use in this position of
Mhm.
to the maximum extent he finds consistent with federal law, and I guess he as in the Secretary of Interior. So does seem like
Mhm.
they still leave room for the Interior to decide, oh no, that was plenty of cooperation. We're moving on. Is that a
They
concern?
do. They do. It is a concern. But I guess if the NGOs and the environmental groups can sue the
Mm,
federal government using the Equal Access to Justice Act, then the local municipalities should be able to use some sort
certainly.
of effort like that also and say, hey, 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 nope, you're supposed to be coordinating with us and you didn't do it.
Hmm.
Just because you collaborated with so and so doesn't mean you coordinated this. And so we can fight back using, the tools that the environmental groups have been using. The three lawsuits against the local BLM office is the reason why they're having to amend it.
Mm,
And so, no, you are a collaborating partner. You are not a government entity who
hmm.
is charged with the economic future of our community. And so, that's why it's government to government. It is not government to NGO. It's not government
Mm,
to user groups. It's government to government process. I'm promoting a committee, to dive through the management plans, to, bring the stakeholders together, to bring presenters together. What's really great about this too, when I was looking through the laws of the state of Colorado, the governor actually has like a coordination process. And so the governor will, what's the word I'm looking for? Provide technical assistance for these communities to cooperate with the federal government
mm,
and to create land use plans to present to the federal government. There's a whole, law there that says that they will help us do that. And so, even with the Office of Just Transition, the transition action plan that I
hmm.
love so much, it says that the state is going to align federal and state agencies to our local strategies. And, it also says that we're allowed to drive our own economic transition. And so, holding all those federal and state offices, to what they say they're going to do is my charge at this point. You
Certainly.
know, I'm we're not going to get blindsided like that again. We're going
Mm,
to be at the table. Yeah.
I love that. If we want to just do like a quick minute on this, I mean, you've kind of talked
Yep.
already, but just roles,
Yeah.
responsibilities that you're seeing here.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of people that are interested in this, and we're all out there anyway playing in the hills. And so, we can do, we love to look at maps and photographs. It's just reviewing all the federal management plans, the SOPAs, schedule of proposed actions for the Forest Service, travel management, any of the health management, sage grouse, things like that. So the coordination committee, some counties do it themselves, but here in the West End, our town trustees are stretched really thin.
Hmm.
So this is where the committee comes in, does all the heavy lifting, and then actually the BLM, federal land management agencies, and the local governments can get together. But the coordination committee that I'm proposing will have, trustees on it. Any tax district can call for coordination. So our fire district, our school district, cemetery district can all call for coordination with federal management agencies because our future and our economics, depend on those policies. And so, to have those people on the committee, will take care of that, tax districts for, more work.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's a government to government process, and the towns have those decisions to make, whether they want to, move forward with this or that, or question the land management agencies on how they can better make sure that their plans are including things that we want to do, like mining and recreation, and how we can organize those areas in our area. And I
Hmm.
think that's important, is that organization.
100%. Well, I'll stop sharing for right now.
Okay.
And let's just, yeah, open up the conversation. So you're doing a good job, a great job of getting voices in, and I think the biggest thing is just how did you find out all this stuff? Like, I think that's the nice thing about our country and our government is like there's a lot of these tools. It's just sometimes they're not even being used because people aren't aware of them. So how did you become aware?
Oh my goodness. So once that lady called me and said, "Hey, you need coordination,"
Mm-hmm.
I I went nuts with the information. I researched. I have great resources. Tom DeWeese and the American Policy Center have helped me out. Margaret Byfield with American Stewards of Liberty, they've got a whole process. Back in the 70s, it was Fred Kelly Grant that came up with this whole coordination process. And so I looked through all his really old paper that
Mm.
he had, his book. I had a guy sent from Oregon send it to me, one of his original books, and I was just thrilled. Garfield County has been doing this since 2020. They've actually been coordinating since 2012. So I really relied on other counties. There's counties out in California, Oregon, Idaho, that all have this coordination process in place. And so I just read all of their stuff, all of their minutes, trying to figure out what would work for the community. And it's like more and more that I read it, it's like, you know what? If this would avoid a lot of conflict for
Mm-hmm.
every industry if this was supported. And so that's where I'm at now, is making sure that the state supports coordination, that our federal government supports coordination. I've reached out to all our representatives and senators here, and local county commissioners. And so Tom Tiffany, Representative Tom Tiffany, has known, he pushes coordination a lot, with his questioning on committee meetings on the Department of, or let's see, the Committee of Public Lands and Natural Resources for the House. He's the chairman. And so he has pushed it for quite a while, and I really value his videos that I've watched, and his interest in supporting. And actually, in 2017, 22 members of Congress signed a letter and issued a draft executive order for President Trump to sign. And he didn't sign it back then. But knowing what we know now, and especially with the National Monument, GORP, NCA, all these other things, I do believe that this is the time to promote coordination. This is also a time to figure out how we can amend the Antiquities Act so this doesn't come forward again, a huge monument that we're just surprised by. So I think all of those things that have happened, and all of the, presidential proclamation, national monuments, that's the reason why the Antiquities Act needs to be amended and the coordination process needs to be pushed, because I think it would solve a lot of conflict, with permits, with everything, with every industry. Um, it's really interesting, and the more I dig into it, and the more I question people and say, "Hey, how is this working for your community?" Some places it's worked very, very well. Others, you got some players in there that are hard to deal with, and so,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the coordination process doesn't work. But all in all, I think it's, having those consistent conversations is going to be the most important thing.
What would you say to someone that says on the pushback side of, oh, this coordination process is just going to take too long? Everything in government takes way too long, and now you want us to do even more talking versus doing.
Yeah. Well, I think we ended up at a table and we end up, these groups end up suing our government,
Mm,
suing the BLM, suing the Forest Service for issues that shouldn't be sued upon. A cow stepping on a arrowhead or,
mm,
a butterfly that only lives in spring-fed meadows that's going to determine the fate of the whole Dolores River. You know, so I think it will dispel a lot of the lawsuits. I do. And just the trust. This will create a trustful relationship. I hope, and
hmm
maybe I'm
hmm
naive and maybe I have, wishful thinking
That's
and
okay.
I'm just
That's what we do all the
slammed
time.
in the face, or stabbed in the back. But it's like, why not try this? This was the
Hmm
intent from the beginning. Clearly, it got out of control in the last 30 whatever years. Let's get back to that flipma. Let's promote this process and see what it is, see what where it can go, and just make sure that collaboration is still happening, but just to make sure that at the end of the day, it's government to government. It's not government to NGO and that's government submitting, to all these lawsuits that are just bankrupting these management agencies. We have got to stop that. We have got to put money into maintaining and repairing, the backlog of repairs and maintenance on the
Mm,
federal lands is just outrageous. Like 22 billion, maybe more than that, 30 billion. So it's like we need to readjust our priorities, and I think that this is a crucial component of that.
certainly. Well, thank you for walking us through that. I'm excited to see how it goes. And just to
Too.
wrap things up for folks here, so when you and I started working together, it was when I was organizing under Just Transition. And
Yeah.
I remember we were hounding away at the Office of Just Transition to release money and to cut some checks for, a coal community, former coal community that is looking to transition into the future. So where are y'all headed? What's the steps right now in front of the West End for a better future?
Ooh. The Office of Just Transition, I'm on that advisory committee, still.
Good.
Um, yeah, I struggle a little bit with that one. It's nice that they put that in place, but then again, it took a long time for them to get organized and get
Hmm
their grant application process in place. I think, I really commend the work that is being done. Um, I just feel like it should have been more, and that was what it was sold as, is the communities were going to bring their projects to the office and say, here's what we need, help us.
hmm
And it's just gotten a little bit off track since then. And so, having to rearrange some priorities that we had, bring some projects out from the back of the file cabinet that we had to dust off just to follow those grant parameters that they've set, has been a difficult process, and the speed of government, as the only coal community that has transitioned, that has
Right.
closed and has lost the property taxes, I would like this community to be more of a priority and treated with more of an urgency. And I don't feel that that's happening up to my standards,
Gotcha.
and I hate to sound like that, but it's like this last grant parameter, I struggled with because they said, we can only use it on infrastructure if it was related to a project. And so for 2 years, we worked on other projects. It was like, okay, so what can we use the money for if we
hmm
can't use it for infrastructure, which is the major thing that we need? That has been our drive from the beginning is infrastructure. What can we use it for? And so we've had to do that. And just in the last couple of weeks, we have found out from the director of the Office of Just Transition that we can use it for infrastructure.
I remember
So,
that fight 2 years
so,
ago.
oh my God. So I was a little dismayed that he finally came out and said that. And it's like, you've been telling us for 2 years that we can't use it unless it's tied to a project. And so there's a little bit of money left over, a couple mil, that that the task force will now be looking at how to divide that money up to use it for infrastructure.
Okay.
We've already kind of committed to the other projects that we had to dig out of the back of the file cabinet,
Hmm.
but now that we can use it for infrastructure, the task force will probably go ahead and use a lot of that for infrastructure and getting some other dollars, capital stacking for that. For those major infrastructure projects that we really need. We can't bring businesses in if we can't flush the toilet. So
Exactly.
that's where we're at. That has been the basis. That is what we have told the Office of Just Transition and the state of Colorado since the office was formed. Even when we were, getting ready to shut down 2 years earlier than they told us we were going to, it's infrastructure. We
Hmm.
have got old, aging infrastructure. And so being able to use that for what we want it for now, a few years too late, but we'll take it and we'll see what we can't do with it. And I'm gonna, I thank the office for everything that they've done for us. I'm more pushing for advocacy for those other state agencies that seem to be holding up the show on a few things for us. And so I'm really pushing for the office and the advisory committee to really manage that action plan where it says they will align state and federal agencies with our local strategies. And so I'm like, here, this is how you can do that for us.
There you go. Yeah.
Please advocate to this office. This is what we need. And so, just working through that. We will recover. It's a slow process. And, to me, every day that we don't get the property taxes that we had, we've lost about 67%
Hmm.
in some of our tax districts. That's a huge loss. I just, treating that with a little bit more urgency is where I'm at.
Great. Yeah. No, I mean, more organizing to be done, and you're doing a
Yeah,
great effort. So, want to thank you again, Aimee, for coming on. Well, you can hang on. We'll talk a
absolutely.
little bit after this. But folks, thank you for tuning in today to Sunday Show live on Better Together. If you want to become a member of our show, you can find us on Patreon, and we're excited to continue to celebrate work that is changing communities. So, thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Aimee.
Thanks. Better together. I love it.
See y'all.